Hey, what's up guys? In today's video, we're going to be designing a product design video. And this one's going to be very interesting because I'm going to show you the entire workflow A to Z. So modeling, design, how I'm thinking when I design, rendering, post-processing, the entire process will all be in this video. So this will be a bit of a longer video, but if you're one of the few that ends up sticking through it, you're going to learn a lot because I'm going to jam-pack this video with tons of useful information. So let's get started. Now I'm going to be discussing a lot of important points in this video. I'm not going to discuss all of them. We actually created a brand new webinar on the 9 secrets to effective design. If you want to check that out, you can head over to blenderbros.com/webinar and watch that video. It's completely free. So what I want to do here is I want to start by just making a basic shape, because one of the most important things you can do when you're designing is to get a basic shape to start with. So we're not thinking anywhere beyond what is the first shape I'm going to have here. So I'm going to start with the default cube. And by the way, everything I'm pressing you can see down here. And what I want to do is I want to scale this up a bit on the y-axis and go to, I don't know, about here. That should be good. I want to make this relatively thin, maybe to about this point. And anytime you scale in object mode, you're going to notice the scale is not uniform. So just press Control A to apply the scale. Otherwise, when you try to bevel, you might have a more biased bevel on one direction as opposed to pressing Control A and having a uniform bevel. So just always do that, or you can scale in edit mode and you won't have to apply it. Now, I was recently watching one of Aidan Garaziu's videos. He's a fantastic industrial designer, and I was watching one of his videos, one of his courses actually. If you're not constantly learning, no matter how good you are, it is always a good idea to purchase courses from people better than you, and I'm always in the pursuit of learning more. So yes, I myself even watch courses because you can constantly learn things from people better than you. And he made a very interesting point. He said once you design enough stuff, once you kind of have a set of references established in your head, you don't necessarily have to use reference photos as much. You kind of know like how certain things work, how the designs will go, and you can kind of pull from that reference bank inside of your head to design your own shapes. Now I've been doing hard surface for such a long time that I kind of have that knowledge bank stored. But when you're learning, you might want to understand, like if you're making I don't know, if you're designing a gun, you might want to understand how the gun works and things like that. This is going to be a relatively basic design, so I'm just going to kind of show you the thought process as we go through it. So I'm going to go ahead and let's bevel this. I'm going to make it a pretty decent sized bevel. And then I'm going to go into object mode. If you don't have machine tools installed, install it. It's free. You can tab into object mode and vertex mode very quickly. And then what I want to do is I want to press Alt X with hard ops and mirror to this direction. If you don't have hard ops, well, get it. It's a good add-on. And we're going to go here. And I just want to have like a general base shape going. Something like this, maybe a little bit wider. Maybe what I could do is take these two faces, move that just a little bit. And there we go. Now, one of the most important things you can do when you're designing is to use bevels to enhance the dynamic elements behind the object. It makes the object more continuous. So if I were to take these two edges here and bevel them with Control B, it just looks a lot softer, a lot more visually appealing to the eye. And then we can go ahead and right click and shade auto smooth just like that. And now we have a pretty basic shape to work with. Now, recently I've been taking a more analytical approach, I guess. I've been doing my designs a lot slower than I used to do them, just because it gives me more time to think. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this mirror modifier. I'm happy with this. And what I want to do is I want to take these edges here, so Control click, and I'm just going to give this a nice chamfer. So Control B, and that should be maybe not so far down. You want to be careful. If you go too far, it's going to overlap some of those edges. So maybe to about here. And let's also make sure our scale is applied because we have a bit of a bias bevel. So Control A, scale, and now we should have a much more uniform bevel. And then let's just go ahead and Alt X to mirror to the other side, just like we did before. And I'm going to make this a little bit wider. So let's go ahead and grab this on the X. Let's take all these faces here, move that a bit on the X axis, just make it a little bit wider. And now what I would like to do is I'd like to take these edges here and bevel them as well. Give that a nice bevel, and then give this a nice bevel as well. And now we have a pretty cool looking shape. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks. It's interesting looking shape. We could definitely work with this, so I'm happy with that. And then what I'd like to do is maybe take these bottom edges here. We can also apply our mirror modifier. And let's just go ahead and take these outer edges, just control click all the way around. And we're just going to go ahead and control B to bevel that. We're going to have a nice bevel on the bottom of the object here. So now we have this kind of, interesting looking shape that we could begin to build on top of. So now what I want to do is I want to figure out what exactly do I want to accomplish with this object. Well, for this particular one, I think I probably threw a render at the beginning of the video. I want this to be some sort of case that you can open. So what I'm thinking about, in my head, or maybe you're using references as well, is how could I, how would this open? Just a very simple thought process. Where do I want this to open really? So I'm going to go ahead and press the D key with hard ops. If it's not working, press Alt W to enable it. And we're just going to go ahead and go to the the Ngon cutter here. And I want there to be like a hatch kind of on the top. Now a very useful design principle we could use here is something called echoing. So we're kind of echoing this 45-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and cut to about here. So we're nice and perpendicular. And then I'm going to cut over to here. It doesn't matter after you pass the origin point how accurate you are, because we're going to mirror it anyways. And then I'm just going to double click and cut through. We'll press the B key to run a bevel, not too big, maybe that size. And we'll press the X key to run a slice operation. And now since this is a little bit more biased on this side, let's just go ahead and press Q, ever scroll the cutter, and then if we press Alt X, we can mirror the cutter. So now it's perfectly centered on that object there. Exactly what I want. Looks good. Cool. And then what I would like to do is basically add in a bevel. So we can select these two with the shift button, shift click both, press Q to add in a bevel, and I don't need a super big bevel. And I'm also going to press the N key. What that will do is turn on the hard and normals. It'll just make the shading a bit nicer. So maybe a bevel about this size, so we have a nice separation there. And I definitely like how this looks. It's pretty cool. I could scale that in and get some pretty interesting effects. So it's pretty awesome. Now, another thing we could do here is kind of emphasize focus on where this hatch will open. You can always add in these small elements here and there, which I think would be useful. So let me go ahead and select this piece, and I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick. I'm going to press Q, Operations, and then shift click on Smart Apply. What this will do is it will apply all the modifiers and then duplicate that object. So now I have a duplicate. And what I want to do is press / on the numpad to go into local mode, just like that. And basically what I want to do is steal some of this geometry. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select all these outer edges here. Just control click around. You could also use Mesh Machine's L select feature. You just select one edge and then alt click the same edge, just select around. And I'm also going to use Mesh Machine's secret little feature here. It's called offset. And what I can do here is I can offset the edges. So if I scroll up, I can offset in this direction, which is exactly what I want. Now, if you don't have Mesh Machine, I would really recommend just getting it. But another option here is to press Control B. And what we can do is press the P key to adjust the profile. So usually what I should be able to do is bevel this, and the profile should let me bend it more in one direction, but doesn't seem to be working here as expected. Basically what profile does, if you're curious, I'll show you real quick, is if you had a bevel and I went to bevel it and I pressed the P key, you can kind of adjust the profile. It wasn't bending in for me as expected, so I'll show you another solution here. It's very easy. Basically all I'm going to do is select all these outer faces here. This is only if you don't have Mesh Machine. I just want to show you an alternate solution. I would really recommend just getting Mesh Machine though. And we can press I to inset, just like that. And you'll basically get a similar solution. Don't worry about this junk up here because all I want is this strip of faces. So if we go into face mode and alt click these faces, I can invert the selection with Control I, press X to delete the faces, and now we're going to have this little strip here, which is pretty cool. And then if I just press / on the numpad, now what I can do is solidify this. So we'll add you can use it with hard ops. You can press Q, add modifier, solidify. You can also do it here in this panel. So we'll go ahead and solidify this. Doesn't have to be super large, but basically what I want this to, I want this to kind of bring emphasis to the area and kind of imply that, hey, this is where this hatch might open or whatever. You know what I mean? So that's exactly why I did that. I just think it looks cool. And we can also add in a small bevel on this one as well. Press the N key to harden the normals, just like that. And then what we can do is we can take this and scale it in a bit. So now we almost have like a hatch. It kind of implies that, hey, this thing might detach or whatever. You can kind of see before and after. It just kind of makes it look a bit more, you know, interesting on the design. Kind of implies this thing can be removed. So pretty cool. And now just like that, we have a pretty interesting looking shape here. It almost looks like a big hunk of metal, which is more or less what I'm going for. Now guys, I get this question in nearly every video, and I answer it in almost every video. And the question is, how do I get these edge highlights? Basically, all you do is you go up here and you turn on Cavity. You should copy my settings. These are the best settings to use for the most effective hard surface workflow. Turning on Cavity allows you to see the edges in a way that you're not able to see with the default shading. It's very important for being able to, you know, picture the designs in your head. Very, very important to turn that on. So that's how you do it. So please, no need to ask the question. I get it a lot. So now we have that, and basically what we're going to do here is we're going to introduce some more functional elements to this particular design, because sometimes, you know, if you're doing sci-fi, sure, you can get away with like fake functional elements, but here, if this is more of like a product design, it might help to make some things that kind of make more sense. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a cube. I'm going to scale this cube down, and I'm going to put some little, I guess you could call them hatches, kind of here on the side. So let's scale this up. Now, a common issue a lot of new hard surface artists do is they keep things too even, too monotone. Don't keep things centered. Bias it a little bit in one direction. It's going to look a lot more effective and a lot more visually appealing. Maybe about 30% down here, 70% up here. And you're going to have a much cooler looking result. So now with this cube, let's go ahead and press Ctrl-A to apply the scale. I'm going to press Ctrl-Alt and left click these edges here. And basically what that's going to do for us is select all the edges in the same direction. We can bevel them. And I hope I'm going slow enough for you guys. I've had some recent comments. People are saying I'm going a bit too quick, which, you know, fair enough. I'll try to slow it down here and try to maintain a pace that everyone can follow. And now that we have this, we're going to go ahead and shift click. Actually, I think this hatch might be a little bit too big, so we can kind of scale that down just a bit. And then we're just going to shift click here and run a difference. You can press Control- on the numpad, or just use hard ops difference. Same thing for this one, and then same thing for this one here. And now we kind of have this cool looking, I guess you call it like a hatch effect or something. We can always add more to that later. And now what I want to do is press Alt-X to mirror to the other side. Now in this case, I don't want to mirror over this object. It's just going to keep it in the same place. I want to mirror over the 3D cursor. So if I press Alt-X, I can go up here to the advanced settings, change this over to cursor, and now it's going to mirror over the cursor. And I can move this, you know, side to side a little bit, see like where a good location is. Detail balance is very important if you want good visuals. If you go too close, it just looks weird. So you really want to maintain a good visual balance on your models, and we have plenty of videos and courses on this. It's something that you just kind of develop over time. So you'll begin to feel it the more you model. I know it's difficult to feel it up front, but the more you model, the more you'll kind of be able to feel, quote unquote, where details should be placed. It's just a game of practicing. So now what I want to do is maybe echo some elements in here. A really effective way to bring additional focus to a functional element is to kind of repeat and echo elements that already exist on the model. So a really easy way to do this, just to reuse elements you already have. I see a lot of people, they're just adding more things. You can reuse stuff you already have. That's what I do in most cases. So I'm going to press Q and then ever scroll to recall this cutter. I'm going to duplicate this cutter. And then what I can do is I can go into edit mode and select it with the A key. And if I press Alt-S, this will scale it along the normals, just like that. I'm just going to do it a little bit. If you go too far, it'll collapse, so don't go too far. And then what I want to do is I want to move this back a little bit more and run another difference boolean, but this time I'm just going to run it on the top portion because I just think it looks a little bit more interesting compared to that. That's just me though. You could probably do either way. I think this looks cooler, but we can always change that later if needed. And I just think this kind of brings a little bit more visual interest to the model. Honestly, what I could do is I could move this back a bit and then maybe recall this other one and move this one back a bit as well. And just kind of play with like the different locations of the shapes and things like that. I think it looks pretty good. And we can always mirror this to the back later, but for right now I'm just kind of focused on the front. So pretty cool. Now Blender does seem to crash pretty frequently, especially if you have a lot of add-ons being used. So just make sure you save your Blender file. I use PowerSave, so even if Blender crashes, everything is like always backed up. I can get right to where I was before. So looks good. So now we kind of have a lot more focus brought to the upper portion of this design. So negative space is very important. Having empty space allows a visual anchor to areas of detail. So I'm going to kind of put most of the detail in this upper portion and leave quite a bit of empty space here in this bottom portion. So what I'm thinking we could do now is maybe introduce like some lines across here. I think that would look pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a cube. Go up here, move this up, and I'm just going to run a difference boolean just to kind of see how it looks before we do anything. And don't worry about the shading artifacts. Later at the end of this video we'll be using a bevel shader instead, so it won't even matter. So I'm going to move this to about here, and I'm going to move this up maybe here, scale this on the Z. That should be good. And then we're just going to go ahead and press Q and then array. We'll press the X key to change the axis. So press the X key twice. And then I'm just going to array that all the way down. And now we have this really cool effect on the top here, which I think looks awesome. And we can always move this back a little bit if needed. Maybe to about there. That looks good. It looks really cool. Now we have just some, most of these designs you'll see on ArtStation, guys, they look complex, but in reality, it's just these extra small details that really make it pop, stuff like this. So don't get too demotivated. It's just a matter of, realizing it's just simple elements stacked on top of each other. It's nothing crazy. So this looks good. I really like how this is turning out. Now what I'd like to do is maybe add in some sort of handle up here. So maybe like a crane picks it up. Maybe it's like a heavy piece of equipment, right? Now before I do that, let me add in a cube. I'm going to make a nice cut here on the top. I just think it'll look cool. Kind of move that down, press Control A to apply the scale. Let's go ahead and bevel. And we're just going to run a difference boolean on here. And that should be a decent size. Now if you're getting these nasty shading artifacts, that's basically only occurring because we have a boolean running on a curved surface here. A nice way to isolate those shading problems is to take the cutter and basically just run some loops through it. Again, I'm not worried about topology here. This is a render. This is not meant to be used in anything else. So I'm going for a cool design. I'm going for a cool render. I'm not worried about topology here. So this looks good. I like that. I'm trying to think. I think this is a decent location. That looks good. I could maybe try moving that up a bit, just seeing if like a different positioning helps, but I think it's good where it is. And now what I would like to do is I would like to, as long as I'm happy with this, I want to apply this boolean. So I'm not going to apply any I don't need to apply. I only apply them when I need to. And the reason I want to apply this boolean here is so that way I can access the edges. So I'm going to apply that boolean, and then I'm just going to take these edges here. Now this is where Blender gets a little bit tricky, because if you try to use Alt Select here, Blender doesn't know how to select through these n-gons. This is why I really recommend Mesh Machine's L Select feature. You select one edge and then you Alt click the same edge and it gives you this result. So otherwise you're going to have to control click through here manually. That is why we use Blender add-ons. It saves us time. So pick them up. We're going to go ahead and I want to bevel this, and yet here's another reason you want to use Mesh Machine. We're going to press the Y key, going to go to offset cut, and what this will do is it will offset edges and eat the surrounding geometry giving us room to add in a bevel, whereas before we would have just overlapped with all the geometry. So we're just going to do that. You can adjust the size. I'm just going to use 0.04. I'm going to make a nice bevel here, right there on the top. It just looks really clean. Maybe a little bit smaller on that. We could go 0.03 maybe. Make ourselves a nice bevel. And it's just going to look a lot more, visually appealing compared to this. It's really clean, really nice product look to it. So now what I want to do is do another cut in here, add some handles. We're going to go to the top. And basically what I'm going to do here is scale this through. It looks good, maybe a little bit taller. And then what I want to do is Control-Alt-Click these edges and bevel them. Now if you're beveling like this, press the C key. What that will do is it will clamp the edges for you, just like that. And whenever you bevel like this and you hit a clamp point, these two edges will overlap at the same point. So if I do this, they're going to overlap at the same point, meaning we're going to have some overlap. So a really easy way to remove that is to install the Machine Tools add-on. It's free. And press the 3 key on your keyboard. That will remove overlapping geometry. If it doesn't work for you, just go to the Machine Tools add-on here in the settings. And there's going to be an option for cleanup. You can just copy my settings if you'd like. Turn on the cleanup feature. Awesome. So now what we can do is we can right click to shade auto smooth and then run a difference boolean on the main object. And now we have this cool looking handle type of thing here on the top. It feels like it's a little bit too big, so I could kind of scale this down, cheat it a little bit. It looks good. I could even, scale this. Now if you scale in one direction with a bevel, you end up getting this issue where the bevel's like almost oval shaped, because you're scaling it on only one axis, right? So a better solution for that type of thing is to go into edit mode, press Z to go into wireframe, and then box select these and then just move it instead. That's going to be a much better solution. And then you can just run a mirror modifier on it. And you can just kind of figure out like how large you want that handle to be. I'm happy with where it was before. And also we're going to be adding in a bevel, so it'll be a little bit larger as well. So let's go ahead, and again, I want to apply this boolean because I want to access those edges. So we're going to apply that. Here, we don't really need to use offset cut because there's no edges in the way. We can just do a nice bevel, just like that. Looks really clean, and then let's just go ahead and run our mirror. We haven't done that yet. Run our mirror modifier. And also let's mirror our... We're missing this piece down here, so let's also mirror this one, Alt-X, the bottom piece, and also mirror this piece as well. There we go, just so we're all mirrored on all the pieces on the X-axis, just like that. So far so good. You can see just how simple this piece really is, but how much more, effective the design is beginning to look. It looks really clean, kind of have some functional elements added in here. I almost forgot to bevel this area as well. Now in this portion, I'm going to have to use offset cut, so we're just going to run that. If the edges are too jagged, you can always increase the factor value to something higher. And we just run the bevel. And there we go. So, looks pretty clean. Don't have any complaints with that one. And so far, so good. So now we can start bringing attention to some more minor details, just kind of emphasizing the overall look of this particular design. Awesome. So what I'd like to do here is, first of all, I just want to add in some small supporting elements, nothing crazy, just to kind of make it look interesting. That's really all these will do. So I'm going to go into the box cutter menu and I'm going to use the line box feature. And I'm going to click here to cut. Now you're going to see it cuts off axis. It's not parallel with this area. So if you press Shift V and go to nearest edge, it'll actually line up with the nearest edge. And then what we can do is we can click, we can cut through, like that. And now we just kind of have this cool look. We could even, move this down a little bit if we wanted to. And then just mirror that. I'm going to press Alt-X, and we're going to change the orientation to global. Just like that. And we need to make sure we're mirroring in the right position. Let's mirror over this piece instead. What you can actually do is shift click on the piece you want to mirror over. We'll just turn off the advanced settings And we should be able to mirror over that side, but maybe it's off axis, not sure. What we can do is just mirror this piece itself instead. Yeah, I just think it was a little bit off axis. You can see we must be slightly off axis, no big deal. What we can do is just mirror all these pieces to get it back in position. No problem at all. So anytime a weird thing like that happens, you might just be off axis. It might be more biased in one direction as opposed to the other. Not a big problem, very easy fix, especially in this type of situation. So that looks great. And then maybe what we could do is introduce like, what do I want to do next? Good question. This is where I get kind of analytical because sometimes I get stuck. I'm not too sure what to add in, but that's going to happen. You just have to sit, kind of look at it, figure out like what the next step is. So what I think would be a pretty cool idea here is to maybe, let's go here to the bottom and introduce some additional elements here. You know, some designs kind of have these like little ridges cut out in the bottom. It just looks cool. We're going to do that. I'm going to rotate this 45 degrees on the y-axis. We're just going to move this in a little bit. You can press S and then ZZ to scale it like that. Looks good. And then we're just going to run a difference boolean on this object to get that effect. And again, very, very important to use bevels. Bevels are just going to make the whole entire design look a lot more dynamic, a lot more interesting really, which is what I want to go for. We can move that down a bit. We can move this over just a tad. That looks fantastic. I like that. We could even turn off overlays and just kind of move this around, see what position we like. And then what we're going to do is apply this boolean right here. And what we're going to do is basically take all these edges and just bevel them. Now in this case, I don't think I need to use offset cut. Maybe offset cut will be a bit better. Depends how quickly you start getting an overlap. Like right here, for example, it starts overlapping because there's no edge kind of guiding it. You could also add in a knife cut. And what that would do is add in an edge to kind of guide the bevel. See what I mean? But I don't have time for that. We're just going to use offset cut. It's a really easy way to do it. Just set that to 1 or maybe 2. Maybe make this a little bit smaller. And then just bevel it and boom, there you go. Looks pretty good. Maybe we could do the same thing to the side piece here. So what we're going to do is add in a cube. Do the same exact thing over here. Rotate this 45 degrees. Actually, I'm not going to rotate this one. I'm just going to keep it as is. Run a difference boolean. And then in here, I'm just going to run a bevel modifier. Just ramp up the amount of loops. And now we just kind of have this cool looking effect. I think it looks nice. We'll go ahead and just play with the position a bit. See what looks nice. I think right here is fine. And then all I want to do is take this boolean, apply it, and I don't think we're going to need to use offset cut here. We're not getting any overlaps, so we'll just bevel that. There we go. Now we have these really clean kind of shapes here on the bottom. This makes the design look a lot more visually appealing. Now, a lot of times the difference between a basic kind of meh design and one that really pops a lot more is introducing just really small basic visual enhancers. Like maybe this plate can kind of be removed, for example. So what I could do is I could maybe add in a cube. Could scale this cube up. And let's just put it right about here. And what I'm going to do is run a slice operation. So Q, booleans, and then slash. We're going to run a slice operation there. And then also we'll go to Everscroll. We want to run the same thing to this one as well. And now it just looks a lot more interesting because now we kind of have this, you know, cool looking element there on the side, which is exactly what I wanted. That looks great. And we can mirror that. We'll go back to advanced settings and mirror that over the 3D cursor. And now we basically have you know, this shape going on. Looks awesome. And maybe what I could do here is introduce like one more small little visual thing. I don't know, I just think it'll look cool, so why not? So now we have a lot of focus being brought to this top part, which is exactly what I wanted. Looks fantastic. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else? I think this is a pretty decent, you know, shape so far. It looks cool. Some sort of crate that can be opened, you know, moved around, things like that. I think what we could do is maybe put some sort of manufacturer's logo so it's not so boring down here. We'll kind of break a bit into the empty space. So what I'm going to do here is take a cube, I'm going to scale it down, maybe put it around here. Right around here should be fine. Then Control A to apply the scale, and then I just want to take all these edges, Control Alt click, bevel them, shade auto smooth, and then we'll just run a difference boolean right here on the front. Now we want to be careful because we have the mirror modifier. I'm just going to go ahead and honestly apply that mirror. Actually, before I even run this, what I'm going to do is just smart apply everything. Operation smart apply, because I'm happy with how everything is here at this point. And I can go ahead and run my difference boolean, and that way the mirror is applied and everything is good to go. And then maybe what I could do is, let's take this top set of vertices and just move that down a bit. I don't want this to be too intrusive. I just want it to be like a nice little visual effect here, I guess you could say. That looks good. Not too bad, not encroaching on the design too much. That looks good. Another thing we could do is, we're going to need to put some text in here. Things will get a little bit messy with a bevel, and I'll show you why. What we're going to do is add in some text. Let's rotate this 90 degrees over the Z, and then 90 degrees over the Y. I'm going to move this over here. And I would recommend using a different font. There's a lot of default fonts that come with the Windows. I'm just going to load in here. The one I'm using is called Agency FB Bold. I think this comes with Windows. Maybe, I don't know. This is the first one in here, and I think it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and double click on that. Now we're going to have a much cleaner font. I can scale that a bit on the Z to have like a more sci-fi look to it. Scale that up. Just move it out a little bit. And then I'm just going to type in some random letters, just to kind of sell the idea, right? BSC. Maybe that's the name of the manufacturer. Move that up here. And I'm just going to go ahead and Control A to turn this into a mesh. So visual geometry to mesh. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have a really messy set of geo. What we're going to do is select everything with the A key, press X, and then limited dissolve. That will just dissolve out the extra stuff. And then we can extrude this in. Make sure you press, sometimes the orientation of the normals will be incorrect, so press Shift N to recalculate that. And then what we'll do is move this in right to about there, and we're just going to engrave this into the mesh. Make sure you right click, shade auto smooth, and we're going to run a union boolean. I'm going to shift click on the mesh, Q, booleans, and then union. And yes, I know the bevel is going to be crazy, just going to start overlapping, right? But we don't need to worry about that, and I'll show you why. Because at the end of this, we're not going to actually be using the bevel modifier. We're going to be removing the bevel modifier, and we're going to be using a bevel shader instead. And if I attach one real quick to see how it looks in rendering mode, we just add in a bevel shader and connect it here. This is going to add in a bevel for us. Now this is way too big. We're going to make this like 0.02. Or maybe like, I don't know, 0.01. But what this is going to do is effectively add in a bevel for us around the edges, which is exactly what I want. You can see it's hard to see. We might need to go really, really low on this value. So maybe like 0.05. You're just going to have to figure out like what value works for you. So let's try 0.005 maybe. There we go. Much better. Now you can actually see that bevel. Because basically what this is a fake shadow effect. So if you go too big, you won't even see it because the shadow will just be too big. But if we go to like 0.002, now we really see that bevel connecting there. So it just depends how much of a bevel you want. And obviously, you're going to see that bevel here as well, versus if we didn't have it, you wouldn't really see the bevel there. So you want to make sure you have, a bevel shader later on. But like I said, we'll be dealing with that later. So for right now, let's just keep that bevel modifier just so we can see how everything looks. And now what I want to do is maybe just add a little bit more text down here. So I'm going to add in another thing of text, rotate 90 and then 90 again. I'm going to choose the same exact font, I'm going to scale that down. Not too small. We're going to move it to about here, and then we can just put in like some like unit number, something like that, just to sell the idea once again. Obviously, if this was like a real design for someone, you'd probably have the actual manufacturer's information, right? But we're just selling the idea in this particular design. I go ahead and extrude that in, and just like we did before, maybe scale that out just a bit. Boom, there we go. And again, I know it's messy, but the bevel shader won't rely on topology. It'll just be a fake effect. So for right now, we'll just leave the bevel modifier as is. I just want to make sure it looks good. I think what I could do is scale this just a little bit taller. And yeah, it looks pretty good to me. Now we're ready for the fun part, which is rendering, getting the nice materials, getting the nice render, and doing all the stuff to make it look like a real product. So rendering is very important, as is lighting. Lighting is going to completely make or break your design. So what I want to do here is go into rendered mode. And you're going to see I probably have a very different viewport in rendered mode compared to you. First of all, make sure you're in cycles and you're using your GPU. If you don't have GPU enabled, you go here to system and turn that on. I'm using CUDA. I don't use optics, just CUDA's fine. The renders are quick enough. And yeah, most of the time your GPU is going to be quicker, but the lighting here is probably going to be significantly different, and that's because I'm using an HDRI. Now, the HDRI I'm using is from a pack by Alex Senechal. We're actually going to be including this exact HDRI in our new Material Works add-on that's coming out in a few months, so depending on when you watch this, we're expecting around July 2023 for that to be released. So if you don't have that HDRI right now, you can find free HDRIs over on polyhaven.com. Studio HDRIs are fantastic, and they give you a really realistic lighting effect. So the exact HDRI I'm using from Alex Senechal's pack is called Gun Gradient Simple B. Like I said, this will also be included in our new Material Works add-on, which I'll actually be showing you here shortly. But you don't have to use it. Obviously, there's other solutions. But for right now, what I need to do is add in a floor. So we're going to add in a mesh plane, move this down, and scale this up. We're just going to make this plane like super, super large. We can apply the scale. And now what we need to do is we need to add in some sort of material for the floor. Now, you can use, Principled BSDF shader, which is Blender's basic material editor. You can go here, you can go to new, and then you can play with the base color. You can play with the metallic values, you can play with the roughness values and things like that. However, since we're making this new product, I'm obviously going to take this opportunity to promote it because I actually believe in it. It is going to be a very, very useful product for you guys with the real physically accurate materials that you can use in your designs. So obviously, I'm going to show you a bit of a preview of that. It's not released yet, but in a few months it will be. And it's a really, really amazing add-on. I want to show you it here. It's taken us several months to develop, lots of money to develop as well. We've had to hire 3 different people, but it's coming along and it's looking really good. So eventually we plan to replace this with actual like viewport orbs because this is a little bit ugly right now how this looks, but we have all the materials created. So what I'm going to look for is just some sort of cool material here. I know the preview in this particular example isn't the best, but like I said before, by the time this is released, this will be a completely different UI. So I'm just going to kind of go here, look for some dark type of floor material and just see which one looks good. I'll pause the video real quick till I find it. So I'm going to filter this over to metal. We're going to choose, let's try this smooth coated titanium. I think that'll look cool. And if we zoom in, you're going to see we have this really, really clean texture on the floor. This looks way better than Principled BSDF materials. I could also try, for example, Velcro or like a foam for the floor. This one's a Velcro material, really, really cool. I could adjust the sliders and things like that, but I'm just going to stick with this one because I want to have kind of a dark floor, like a dark render. And I can also press 5 on the numpad to go into orthographic mode because this is how I'm going to end up rendering this particular object. Now the first thing I need to figure out is where exactly, do I want the render to come from and where do I want the lighting to hit? So what I want to do is I want to make sure the lighting is hitting the front, not the side. So I'm going to go here to the world panel, and I'm going to rotate this HDRI. You can also press Control T if you don't have a mapping node. Just make sure Node Wrangler is enabled. It comes with Blender. And I'm just going to rotate this until I find like a decent lighting position. And for right now, this should be okay. Maybe like right around here it looks good, but we're not going to really be able to see it until we have additional materials applied. So let's do that now. So the one I'm going to use here is our carbon fiber coated material. So I'm going to go here and look for that. It's a metal. I just got to find which one it is. Carbon fiber coated. Where is it? It's in here somewhere. Here it is. And again, by the time this add-on is released, the UI is going to be way better. Everything's going to be cleaner. It's going to be working. It's going to have better previews. But for right now, this is just a version that is not available to the public, but it gets the job done. So I'm just going to use this carbon fiber coated because it has this really, really clean texture to it, as you can see. And it just kind of makes it look a bit more three-dimensional, which is exactly what I want. Now it's a little bit too dark, so I'm going to play with the color. Now in this add-on, you're going to have full control over basically every single parameter for the material. So you'll be able to tweak the color, you'll be able to tweak the height, the roughness, you'll be able to tweak everything about these materials with this add-on without having to touch nodes at all. There's going to be way more features built in, but for right now, like I keep saying, this is the beta version, but I'm going to make this base color a bit brighter. Obviously, since you don't have this add-on right now, at least when this is uploaded, you can just use the principled BSDF materials, get a very similar result to mine. Now you're going to see the shading's a bit messed up, so what I'm going to do instead of using harden normals, I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to use a weighted normal instead. Usually that'll fix the issues with this weird shading. And I'm going to go here, shift click on all these other objects here, and then shift click on the one with the material, and then go here to copy material to selected. And now what we're going to have is, the material applied to the whole thing. So now we have a material we can actually work with here, which is fantastic. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and remove the bevel modifier from everything. Just remove that bevel modifier, because I'm going to be using a bevel shader. So we don't have it built into the tool yet, but it will be built in by the time it's released. But for right now, I'm just going to go into the node editor real quick and just plug in a bevel shader here. That's one thing we needed added, so we asked our programmer to implement that, and that'll be there soon. It should just be like a tick box. It'll allow you to add in a bevel shader, really easy. And also let me turn on keep sharp, so make sure there's no weird issues. And there we go. So now we have our bevel shader. Looks great. We don't have to use any bevel modifiers or anything like that. And we're not going to have any weird artifacts like we did before. Awesome. So this is looking really clean. I'm going to rotate the HDRI just a little bit more and just kind of see if I can find the sweet spot. So, the more I move it, the more the lighting's changing. I want to keep this more or less in the front. So usually what I do is I try to find like a threshold, like between, in this case, between 200 degrees and like 240. So maybe somewhere in the middle there, it could be good. Because I really just want to highlight the front. And I think that looks great. And I also want to add in a camera. So let's press Shift A, camera. I'm going to make this square, so 2560 by 2560. And then go to View, Align View, and then Align Active Camera to View. And I'm going to make this camera here. You can use orthographic. However, if you're going to be using depth of field, you want to use perspective and set this to something high, like 400 millimeters. Then you can press G, ZZ to move this back. And basically what that's going to do is give you the same exact effect as if you had orthographic. So, but this it'll work with the depth of field, which is what we're going to use in a second. So I'm just going to zoom this out so it's not so cramped inside the frame. Something like that could be good. I also like to turn on the render region feature, so I'm only looking at the render itself. And also move this up a bit on the Z-axis. Something around here could be good. Now it's a little bit too dark on the side. We can't see too much detail, so I'm going to add in a reflector. Basically what a reflector does is if you make a plane completely white, it will reflect the light back onto the object. This is better than using an actual light. It's more natural. So what I'm going to do here is add the plane, move it over here somewhere, and basically what you can do is you can add in a material, make it completely rough like that, and then you can kind of like dim it or make it brighter. You just have to find like a nice middle ground, not too dark, not too bright, maybe right around there. And now we have a pretty decent result. We have nice lighting, nice studio lighting, a really nice material, and also just an overall clean type of, look here in the scene, which is exactly what I want. And the best thing about these materials in this add-on we'll be releasing is you don't need to tweak anything. You don't need to tweak the roughness values or anything. It is all built ready to go. So the roughness values and everything are completely clean. Although if you wanted to, you could, adjust them, but they're exactly where they need to be, which is why I'm super excited to get this add-on release. It's going to be amazing, especially for hard surface artists out there. So now what I need to do is maybe add in some decals. Decals are super, super effective just to kind of make the design look more interesting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm using Decal Machine for this, by the way. Decal Machine is a great add-on. I'm going to go here to maybe this one. If you want to download our decal and trim sheet pack, you can purchase it on our website. We have tons of trim sheets in there, tons of decals, several hundred, so you can pick those up if you want. What we're going to do is maybe put like an arrow there. It's a nice way to indicate, where a certain area of focus should be. And I'm also going to make this alpha value a bit lower, so it's not like a super bright decal, right? And then maybe what I'll do is add in some of these. Actually, before I do that, let me add in a text logo. So maybe let me find some here. We do have a free decal pack over on our website as well. It's for like text decals. If you want to get these for free, you can do that over on blenderbros.com. I just need to find a cool one here that I like. I haven't found anything quite yet. Just got to find something that I think fits the idea. So I'm going to grab this one right here, and we're just going to snap it on. RZZ 180. You can use any decals you want. It's just meant to kind of, make the model look a little bit more visually appealing, more interesting, tell more of a story. Let's make this alpha value maybe 0.5. We don't have to go too heavy on it. I could also try positioning this in, different locations, but I don't want to ruin the composition, so I think right here would be a better option. Looks good. I'm also going to make sure this is more or less lined up. Just me being picky. There we go. And then I'm just going to take maybe some of these bolts right here and just kind of, snap them on. We'll put one right here. Let's go to the material matching mode and just kind of do that. We have a full video on Decal Machine on our channels if you want to check any of those out. Pretty easy add-on to use. Then we're going to mirror that to the other side. Looks good. Looks really good, actually. Then maybe I'll do like one more thing. Maybe we'll take one of these, I don't know, one of these things. I think they look pretty cool. Just grab this. Doesn't really matter what it says because we're not going to be able to see it. And we're just going to put it right over here. Move that right over the center more or less. And definitely make this alpha value super low, maybe like 0.1. And project it like that. Maybe a little bit too big. Try it again. There we go. And now we kind of have this cool, render. It's pretty much exactly what I want. So now what we need to do is render this thing out. So what I'm going to do is make sure where under the render settings here under render, I'm going to make the samples around 256. I don't need to go too high because I'm going to be using the denoiser here. And I'll be using GPU Compute 2560 by 2560 for the square resolution. And then we'll just press the F12 key on the keyboard and wait for this to render. It shouldn't take more than, a minute or two depending on your computer. So here's the first render. So make sure you save each of these renders. We're going to be doing one, just this render here. Then we're going to do another render, which is just the object, so we can use that as a cutout. So go ahead, save this image. And then all we need to do is we need to delete out the floor, Make sure under render settings, our film is set to transparent, so that way we're rendering a transparent background. And we're going to render this one as well. So we'll be able to use this as a cutout inside of Photoshop, which is exactly what I want. And then just make sure you undo that change because I want to bring the plane back. I'm gonna press Ctrl S to save the scene, and now we can hop over into Photoshop. But before we do that, I want to mention the reason we go into Photoshop. The reason we post-process our images is for much of the same reason that professional photographers, no matter how attractive their client is, no matter how dressed they are, no matter how good their hair looks, no matter how good the location is, it's never going to be as good as having all those factors plus a little bit of color grading, a little bit of touching up the photo, a little bit of making the skin imperfections a bit cleaner. It's the same exact reason we do this in 3D. We make the image look a little bit more clean so we can market our work even better. You might not like it, but unfortunately, that is not what the market cares about. The market cares about clean, crisp looking images, and you can argue saying, oh, you shouldn't have to do that, while I'll just be doing it and getting the results, which is what you should be doing as well. Always post-process your work. It's very, very important. You don't have to use Photoshop, but at least put a little bit of effort into post-processing. It is super, super important and can be the difference between you getting attention on your work and you not getting attention. So here I have the cutout and the main render. What I want to do is shift click the cutout, drag it over here. We can close this one, and I'm just going to move this layer here to the bottom in Photoshop and just turn it off. The only reason we have this layer is because if I control click on it, we can only affect this area. You'll see why I'm doing that shortly. My post-processing workflow is very simple. I don't do anything complex. I usually adjust the exposure slightly, the contrast, and add a bit of film grain and surface imperfections, and that's generally about it. So let's go ahead and select this main layer, press Ctrl J to duplicate it. It's always a good idea to have, the main layer, so that way you can always go back to it if needed. So we'll duplicate that with Ctrl J. And let me also turn on my screencast keys. I think they turned off, so that way you can see what I'm pressing. And what we're going to do here is go to the filter and then camera raw filter. And most of my effects are very simple. I see most people going way overboard on post. Bad idea. Keep it simple. So I'm going to increase the exposure just a bit, maybe like 0.1, literally a small difference. Shadows you could play with a little bit, but we're not going to do that right now. Highlights you could lift a bit. Now clarity is very important because clarity is going to really make the image pop a lot more. So we have clarity, and then we also have texture. So if I increase texture, it'll make the texture pop a bit more. I wouldn't go too high on either of them. Now whenever you lift clarity, you also want to lift the shadows as well, because clarity tends to affect the shadows. So you more or less want to have the same value as clarity and shadows. And now we just have a very simple increase in the overall look. You can see before and after, very subtle, but much cleaner. Awesome, so very simple, really just play with the exposure. The most important ones here are exposure and clarity. Clarity is gonna really make it pop. Exposure is gonna make it a little bit brighter. The rest are more or less optional. Now, the other effects I do here, I'm just gonna show you my personal workflow. You can do this natively in Photoshop. I just think it's slower. What I'm gonna do here is use the Nik Collection plugin, and I'm gonna use the Color Effects Pro tool. And the reason I use this is because it's just quicker, really. So what I'm going to do here is introduce a little bit of film grain. So let me just line this up so you can see it. Really all I'm going to do here is go to film grain. I'm going to make the film grain soft, and I'm going to make the grain not too low. That's way too much. But you do want to make it noticeable. Film grain also helps to kind of add those surface imperfections on the metal. You can kind of see how much cleaner that looks, and also it will introduce a little bit of contrast in here as well, which is exactly what I want. Go ahead and click on the OK button, and you're going to see right away once the film grain hits and the contrast hits, it's going to look way better, just way more realistic already. And then usually what I do is do the surface imperfections before this. It doesn't matter too much. I'm just going to continue as we were doing. I'm going to also introduce a little bit of pro contrast, because what pro contrast will do is just make the contrast a little bit more enhanced. And this is really the final effect I'm using. So I'm going to go ahead and go to pro contrast. Just going to lift that a bit. It's going to kind of brighten it up a little bit on the side. Could do some dynamic contrast. You don't want to go too crazy with it. Just keep it nice and subtle. And lift the shadows maybe. Click on OK. And just wait for it to load. And this is going to be the last effect I make besides some surface imperfections. You can see, boom, just like that. Looks so much better, really brings the attention to that main object. And at this point, I would highly recommend adding in some realistic effects like surface imperfections, for example. And I'll show you how I do that. So there's a Blender add-on called Smudger Pro. I don't use the add-on in Blender, but I do use the texture maps that it comes with. Basically, all you need is a black and white grunge map. You can find them on the internet. If you just want to buy the add-on Smudger Pro, there's plenty of those included. And eventually our Material Works add-on, we plan to make a grunge maps built in with that, but that's going to be for a later release later on in the year, if not next year. But that's an eventual plan we have, so that way we don't have to do this so much in Photoshop. Anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and grab, some smudges. You can do some fingerprints and just drag this in. Control T to scale it down, and we're going to change this to screen. That will remove the black values. So now we only have the fingerprints, and this is precisely why I wanted to have this cut out. If I control click on it and then add in a mask, now it's masked to this area, which is great. And then what I could do is drop this opacity, kind of like that. I could press G to go into the gradient tool, press X to make that, flip that to the black value, and then I could just kind of get in here and remove some areas where I might not want too much of the surface imperfections. So like right here, a little bit heavy, and this will just kind of bring, we're just using, we're painting out the white with some, black values here, because white reveals, black conceals. And we'll maybe use one more effect on here. We could find like, these are pretty cool. I'm not going to go too overboard with this. Sometimes I'm guilty of that. I'm going to try to not do that in this video. Then again, control click here. And just lift that a bit, maybe a little bit of dust. And maybe we could do like one more, set of effects on here. Just these random smudges could be kind of cool. Let's go ahead and add that in, drop that opacity, and make sure we change this to screen. Can lift that opacity a bit, and we're definitely going to need to use that gradient tool to mask out that little detail over there. And just like that, this is the before and this is the after. Now do you understand why post-processing is so important? Because you're going to get results that go from this to this, and that is the difference between attention on your portfolio and people clicking out. And then at this point you could add in like your own branding, like put your logo up here, your name, and then maybe something down here. I'll leave that up to you, but this is basically the entire workflow to go from a full design in Blender to a completed result inside of Photoshop here. Really hope you enjoyed that workflow. Hope you got a lot of value out of this video. If you did, let me know, and definitely head over to blenderbros.com. There's a ton of valuable resources on there, and if you want to check out that free webinar I mentioned before, where I go into some of the stuff I mentioned in this video a little bit more in depth, you can head over to blenderbros.com/webinar and check out that free training as well. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.